Hello, my friends, and welcome to the next episode of the Divide and Conquer faction overview videos for version 5. This week, it is time for Guldur, an interesting orc faction to say the least. So, going on into a bit of the lore to start off with, in the early Third Age, a presence who you should all probably know is Sauron, was known as the Necromancer, and he took up residence here at Dol Guldur, which used to be the capital of the Sylvan Elves under King Orifer, who is King Thranduil's father, before they ended up leaving to go north to the farther mountains on the north side of Mirkwood. So, even though the White Council has cleared Sauron from Dol Guldur just before the Battle of the Five Armies, he has, at this point in the history, has come back to Dol Guldur and established a power base there in the north as kind of an outreach of his domain in Mordor. So that is pretty much the backstory for Dol Guldur as a faction. You are part of Mordor. You share a lot of similarities, but you also have some unique differences playing as Dol Guldur. So starting up with settlements, you only have Dol Guldur to start with. If the AI is playing Dol Guldur, they'll end up getting Aknadion, Ostengale, Dor Lingvar, and Dor Naurhak, as well as Eren Runen in the turn 1 auto expansion. I think they might get to Sture, but I'm not 100%, I can't remember off the top of my head if they get to Sture or not. I think they just skip to Eren Runen. But as the player, you will only have Dol Guldur, so that kind of puts you in an interesting position. You need to kind of spread out and expand your shadow around Dol Guldur, and that might be a little bit challenging at first, but it's not too bad. Aknadion for Rebel expansion only has a few units, including like just some Valesmen and a Sellsword that are in there. Dor Naurhak has a significantly stronger garrison, but again, nothing too bad, about half a stack. Dor Lingvar is a good castle to take, about 6 units in there, Ostengale, and pretty much all of Rovanion is free and open to you for expansion. And Dantalad, though this one has a huge garrison in the village, I probably would not push for Dantalad. The garrison is huge there to kind of buffer Mordor from being able to push too far into Ruin and Dorwinion into that territory. So I wouldn't go for Dantalad, it's not going to make you much money. Outside of that, that is pretty much it for the Rebel expansion. You do have multiple neighbors near you. To the west, Karis Galadhon. And to the southwest, the Men of Rohan, who probably won't be an issue in the beginning of your campaign. To the north, your predominant enemy will be the Anduin Vale, though they are stretched very thin, as we've talked about in the Anduin Vale video. And to the far north, you have the Elves of Mirkwood and the Dalesmen and Erebor. And to your far east, you do have Dorwinion, but they aren't really a problem. Typically, they'll be preoccupied with runes, so you don't got to worry about Dorwinion. But it's kind of like a Gondor situation, really. You have many enemies and not many allies, though your two allies that are nearest to you, Rune and Mordor, are incredibly powerful. So you will be doing a lot of fighting, but in the far north, you do have some aid from the Snow Orcs who take Rakyaburg in turn 1 and cause issues for pretty much all the factions in the north. The Snow Orcs are quite powerful. They will do a good amount of work to the men of the Anduin. They'll push on into the Woodland Realm, and typically they'll push on to Erebor also. So you probably don't need to worry too much about your northern enemies. You're relatively safe. Dol Guldur itself is a very defensible fortress. Anyone that attacks it, they have to take their siege equipment, go up a hill, and then into the fortress, and any attacker is going to be instantly exhausted by the time they make it to the top, more or less, and you have a very favorable defensive position there. So that will be it for Rebel expansion, and nearby expansion, you're just going to have to fight your enemies, like, immediately, but you do have plenty of Rebels to take up first. Starting with your lords, so you have 4 starting lords. Lord Kummel the Easterling, who is in Dol Guldur, so you can find him there. Chieftain Lagrin of the Neck, who is in your northeast, kind of by Ostengale. Aglaricor the Sycophant, who is in your southeast, kind of towards Dor Naurhak. And Ulairon, who is your only non-Nazgul starting general, and he begins in a fort here, just south of Tustore, or as it used to be known, Brown Boat. So all of your characters are unique. They each have their own bodyguard. So for Kummel, you do have Shadow Knights, a very, very powerful mounted bodyguard. It's actually kind of incredible how strong Kamul is, but he deserves it. He deserves it. A Glarikor comes in with Castellans. Do note the 0 upkeep there. And that is also the same for Lagran of the Net, Castellans of Dol Guldur. And then for Ulairon, he also comes with his own unit of Shadow Rangers. So a good archer unit, 2 heavy sword and board infantry, and 1 super heavy cavalry unit to lead your nations. There are no other standard bodyguards that you start with, though you can train Orcish bodyguards. But these are your only 3 Nazgul. You don't have to worry about them really dying or anything, because the Nazgul respawn sometime between 10 and 15 turns, and they will respawn for you so long as you own Dol Guldur. Now that will not apply for Mordor, so should Mordor lose Barad-dûr, you will not get the Nazgul to respawn in Dol Guldur. At least I am like 90% certain it does, like they will not come to Dol Guldur. I am 90% sure that's how it works. There's a 10% part of me that thinks that maybe it could be possible, but I've never had that scenario happen, so I wish I could say for certain. And I guess I could just go look in the files, but I don't think you'll typically ever experience that in a normal game anyway. So that's it for the Nazgul. Should Ulairon die, then he is dead. You won't be able to get him back. He's not a Nazgul. He is just a man, just a regular Dark Ranger man. That's it for your characters. So you have very, very powerful generals, and that's it for your settlements nearby. So we'll go into the construction and how you can expect to play Dol Guldur. So they pretty much have no restrictions, as most factions. The restrictions are all gone. You have the standard stables, barracks, and archery range with a tier 3 option for the barracks, which we'll get to in a moment. The beast cages for trolls. You are a level 3 armor, so lowest tier of blacksmithing, only the blacksmith you can get for your faction. And then for guilds, you only get the fighter's pit, and then everything else is pretty standard there. So going into the military recruitment, so your first tier of the stables, you do get Warg Marauders if you upgrade that to the Warg Cages, which only requires a Slave Hall, the tier 2, that might be tier 1, hold on. That is actually the tier 3 Town Hall. You can get Warg Cages, which give you Goblin Striders. For the ranges, at the practice range, you get Dol Guldur Archers and Dol Guldur Scouts. The archery range, the upgrade will give you Goblin Stalkers and Goblin Headhunters, so very decent options there. And then for the barracks, the tier 1, you get Dol Guldur Host, Orc Maulers. At tier 2, you include the Uruk Slayers and Mirkwood Uruks. And at tier 3, the Shadows Calling, you get Castellans of Dol Guldur, only in Dol Guldur itself. Kamul's Shadow Guard, which are available anywhere with the Shadows Calling. Kamul's Shadow Rangers, which are only available in Mirkwood regions and bordering. The Great Black Spiders, which are also only available in Dol Guldur. And the Kamul's Shadow Knights, which are only available in Dol Guldur. So you're going to want to get the Shadows Calling in Dol Guldur as quickly as you can. I'd recommend rushing that building, and you basically have a very, very powerful military base right there at your heartland. It does require the archery range to be built, which means you at least need the tier 3 hall in order to get that. Interesting that it does take that, and that is because it has the Shadow Rangers in it, so you need to get capability for an archer range to be able to get the Shadows Calling. And of course, we talked about it, you get the Beast Cage. Only the tier 1, so only regular trolls, no Olog High, no Great Beasts, none of that for Dol Guldur. Those are Mordor exclusive. So that's pretty much it for the military recruitment. You can get the Shadows Calling virtually anywhere, so it is not locked to say Dol Guldur, but you will get the most benefits if you have it in Dol Guldur, because it gets you 2 very powerful units, being the Shadow Knights and the Black Spiders. So going over the changes from version 4.6 to 5, not a whole lot happened, but I did showcase them in my playthrough as Dol Guldur. So the bodyguard has changed for Dol Guldur. It is now instead of it being the regular Uruks that Mordor gets, you now get Mirkwood bodyguards, which are melee, very melee focused with 12 melee attack. They have dual weapons, but they also throw axes, which are armor piercing. Their melee weapon is not AP, but their throwing weapon is, so very interesting bodyguard there. Pretty much the only throwing axe bodyguard off the top of my head, and yes, I am like certain that is the case. They are the only throwing axe bodyguard, so something interesting there. Not the only throwing weapon bodyguard, because there's also Enedwythe, but they have an interesting profile given that stat spread, and there's no other orcish axe throwers, so kind of a nice niche there. Guldur itself, the unique building here being the castle, does give you 4 recruitment slots, so you pretty much have full recruitment capacity until you get the tier 4 town hall, which should give you 5, actually gives you 6. So you get 6 slots at the tier 5 or tier 4 and 5 at the tier 3 slave hall. So you have plenty of capability to recruit units right off the bat. And also there have been changes, so the generic general, captain, and spy models have been upgraded. So we'll zoom into the spy here. As you can see, he is dressed up like one of the goblin headhunters. And if I take out a captain here, this is the new look, pretty much looking like a standard Dol Guldur orc infantry unit. We also already talked about the fact that Castellans have 0 upkeep now, since they are technically undead. So field as many of these as you can, because it is free to do so. And finally, that Dol Guldur now has the Great Spiders, which is an interesting unit for them to have. They don't cause crashing in the game anymore, so should you be able to field them, you will find they are a very powerful, albeit somewhat squishy, cavalry-like, elephant-like unit. So they can die quickly, but they can do a lot of damage. So my personal advice, if you play as Dol Guldur, rush military in Dol Guldur itself. Take Aknadion, take Ostengyle, take Dor Lingvar, and definitely take Rosgabel. It has a unique settlement and a small starting garrison, so it's worth taking that. And really, it's going to be a pretty straightforward campaign. You have plenty of cheap options. I recommend getting just lots of Mirkwood Hunters and Mirkwood Goblins, because they are very cost effective at only 100 upkeep per turn and less than 300 gold to recruit each of them. In numbers, the goblins really actually perform pretty well. And basically just combine those guys with wargs and archers, and that's all you really need. Orc maulers are a fantastic unit for taking out bodyguards and any heavy armor that you might find in Lorien's armies. But primarily you're going to want wargs and lots of cheap infantry. The hosts are respectable with decent defense, but we'll get more into the actual units later on. So it could be recommended to try and rush Lorien, though you really don't need to worry about that. The elves have such low recruitment capabilities that you can kind of just turtle up here along the fort and just kind of govern your western borders until you're ready to push in, because they do get quite a few garrison units at Karis Galadhon, and should you take it, their last stand army will spawn. But once you beat that, the Elves of Lorien are pretty much done for. They just cannot keep up with you in terms of how many units you can pump out versus how many they can pump out. And should you continue west, you will have access to Khazad-dûm, the eastern half, which they will probably lose most of their army just fighting the goblins anyway. It probably won't be too hard to take, and you'll be able to get very good mining income from Khazad-dûm. So push west. The men of the Anduin Vale are going to be a bit more of a challenge to you with their skin changers and such, so be wary of those. You do have plenty of ranged options to take out skin changers, but the Anduin Vale, they will have plenty of recruitment capability. They have been buffed as an AI faction now, so they do have expanded recruitment capabilities, so you will see a bit of a pushback from them. But once you've kind of dealt with them, like, you'll find, like, you really don't have much to worry about. I don't think you're ever really in danger of losing a campaign as Dol Guldur, even though your start is somewhat slow. It's such a defensible position. Your Nazgul respawn. It's maybe you could get stalemated, but I'd say it's one of the easier campaigns, maybe easy to medium difficulty, but I personally think orcs are easy just because of how cheap they are and how you can abuse the AI skills with just sheer numbers and human tactics anyway. And once you pretty much take all of Mirkwood here and take out Anduin and Lorien, you're pretty much unstoppable. Mordor by that point should be expanding a lot, and they should be winning their war against Minas Tirith. Very rarely does Mordor ever perform badly. Mordor will also probably pour into Rohan. Do note that currently in version 5, Rohan typically wins out against Isengard, so Rohan may find some room to push towards your direction, in which case there could be some threat because of all the cavalry. You don't have a whole lot of options yourself for dealing with cavalry. In fact, you'll see that spear-wise, there's not a lot of options for Guldur once we get into the battle map. But that's pretty much it for the campaign map side of things. Obviously, with the One Ring script, you can take the ring to Mordor, and then you'll get rewarded with a nice lump sum of money, and Mordor will get a very powerful army, including Sauron. And that's pretty much it for the campaign map. Not a whole lot of changes from version 4.6, but now I will go ahead and transition over to the battle map. And now we return on the battle map side of things. So we're going to start with infantry, archers, cavalry, and then we're going to go into the specials for Guldur. So starting off with the infantry, first off, the first unit you're going to be able to recruit pretty much anywhere, as long as it's a castle or it is a settlement with a town hall. The Mirkwood Goblins, a 254 unit goblin unit, and yes, I'm probably overhyping these guys right now. They are utter complete trash, but they have plenty of utility. They are a 242 unit with only 1 armor and 1 shield, 0 defense skill, so they do not do well in melee, but they are very cheap. You can recruit lots of these and spam your armies and fill them out with numbers. They make excellent damage sponges for either absorbing a cavalry charge or taking arrow fire. They also work well as just to hold off the enemy infantry for some time while your other units can get around the flanks or get to a position to support. So there's plenty of utility in a unit like this. Being that they have 254 models means that it will take typical infantry a very long time to actually kill these goblins, because they have to kill just so many of them. So they are great as like a blocker, or just as a frontline unit meant to absorb arrow fire. You can just throw them around the flanks, throw them into enemy archers, and forget about them. So I'm actually kind of a fan of trashy units like this, because I can always find a use for them. But obviously, you don't want to bring these guys into a siege unless they're the ones pushing the ram. You don't want these guys to even be taking part in like a dwarven settlement. If you're attacking like Erebor, you're not going to want Mirkwood Goblins. You're going to want something better. But for general campaign purposes, I find the Mirkwood Goblins to be excellent at just being thrown away and forgotten about, and they're not going to beat any enemy. I mean, they might beat like a really weak tier 1 archer, but they'll at least just be a distraction, and they'll take a little while to die. Their biggest weakness is going to be cavalry charges, so obviously don't let them take a charge or their whole unit's basically dead. And I think I've said more than I need to about your worst unit in the roster. So we're going to move on to the Guldur host. Not so much of a trash, but a decent unit, going to 228. So you can still see, being an Orc Nation, they have plenty of numbers here. And even though these guys are a significant step above the Mirkwood Goblins, with twice the attack and 4 times the defense, they're still not that great. 4-8 and solid, and their relatively high armor value for a low tier unit does mean that they'll take archer fire a bit better than the Mirkwood Goblins, but they are pretty slow average morale and morale response for an Orcish unit. I don't expect too much of them. I would treat them almost the same as the Mirkwood Goblins. They'll do okay in melee. Their armor will help them stay alive quite a bit longer than the Mirkwood Goblins, but outside of that, nothing too special about them. You'll probably be fielding a decent number of Guldur hosts in your early armies to kind of supplement the Mirkwood Goblins. Now we're going to go into the second tier, so this is when you upgrade your barracks to tier 2. First off, the Uruk Slayers, your 7 attack, 13 defense, armor piercing axe unit. A very good unit to have, especially if you're going to go up against dwarves or heavily armored elves. These guys absolutely destroy any bodyguard, as long as they're not taking a charge from cavalry and not getting shot to death by archers. Obviously, if you're playing any archer nation or the elves or anyone, you're going to want to shoot the axemen. But they do have 8 armor, which does keep them alive. 5 defensive skill is actually decent, though no shield. And they also have good morale, and they're good against elephants, but that won't ever really be a factor unless you turn on Harad or fight Mordor yourself. They could work, I guess, against chariots, but when are you going to go against those unless you fight Enedwythe or Rune? So that bonus doesn't see much use, but they have very solid stats, much better than other like early tier axeman units that other factions get. So a solid unit. They Effective against armor, like I said, good stamina. So not much more to say about these. They are shock infantry first and foremost, and you'll also start to notice this is where the numbers start to dwindle in the tiers. Next to them, your only dedicated spear unit in the entire roster, so a bit of a weakness, is spears, and these are your Mirkwood Uruks. So pretty middling stats, 5 attack, 18 defense. They're pretty much just a weaker version of Gondor Spearmen, -1 attack and -4 total defense, but they are spearmen nonetheless. They do not get shield wall or any of that fancy stuff there, but they are your only real defensive unit that you have, and if you need to protect something from cavalry, you're going to need to recruit as many Mirkwood Urks as you can, though it will take some time to build up the military infrastructure to get to that point. So, but if you want to go fight Rohan, definitely bring a lot of Mirkwood Uruks, which means you'll need a lot of tier 2 barracks, basically in every settlement you can. So that is one major weakness in Dol Guldur's roster, a lack of spears, but the Mirkwood Uruks do at least give you that option. Now, in the Tier 3 Shadows Calling, we have 2 infantry units here. First off, the Castellans of Dol Guldur, these, of course, being your Nazgul bodyguards, and very powerful. 10 basic attack, 27 defense, very hard to kill. They will never rout because they are undead. They're basically armored up ghosts or wraiths. They will never rout, and they frighten the nearby enemy infantry. Only 1 hit point, even though they're undead, but they are pretty much like Barrow Wights, very powerful. Not good against, not effective against armor, but that high attack and high defense is not commonly seen in a lot of, like, orc armies, other than their elite units, so they fill that role. And because they're free, you're going to want to recruit these guys pretty much every time that you can get. In fact, now that I think about it, saying you don't get high-tier infantry is definitely not accurate, because there's a lot of high-tier infantry for orcish factions, so I'm going to take that back. But they are your best dedicated sword and shield unit, and they fill an amazing role in that they don't cost you upkeep. So send these guys, you'll always want these guys in the field. There's no reason to have them sitting in a base for free upkeep because they don't need it. The only time you'd want them to really be sitting in a settlement is if you need to defend that settlement for whatever reason. But they are otherwise just necessary to have out in the field wherever your armies are going. Next to them, the Kamul's Shadow Guard, an ambush shock infantry without the armor piercing, 15 attack, 21 defense, and they also inspire your nearby troops, so they can be good if you don't have a general or a captain nearby. They can kind of keep your goblins fighting just that bit longer. And that they're human, they're relatively fast, 100% movement speed, good morale, but they can break. They are best used for ambush purposes because they have 12 armor, which is decent, but other enemy archers can whittle these guys down due to the lack of a shield and other arrow defense. But a wicked unit, I'm a big fan of them. I like their designs, and that fact that they can hide anywhere makes them very good battlefield assassins. Like, you might just want to deploy them on the flank or something of your army, wait for the enemy to get close, and then have them basically do a big, long charge into your anvil. So that's what they're good at. Going on to the Mirkwood Bodyguard, so like I already talked about them in the campaign overview, 12 melee, 9 missile attack that is good against armor. They are also strong against mounts with their melee abilities, though throwing axes can do a lot of damage to cavalry. And 18 total defense. Just don't let these guys take a charge and they'll do very solid damage. Though do note, because they have the highest throwing weapon missile attack, they will probably get shot down by like enemy archers and stuff. They'll tend to focus your general, which may be good or it may be bad depending on the scenario. On one hand, it spares your other units from getting shot, but on the other hand, it puts your general in more danger. So that's one downside to throwing weapons. They tend to always draw enemy archer fire. But the Mirkwood Bodyguards, being that they regenerate, maybe that's a good thing, as long as you just don't let the general himself die. So that's it for the infantry department. Nothing too fancy here, other than, I would say, the Castellans and the Shadow Guard. So next up, we're going to go into the archers, and this is somewhat of a specialty of Dol Guldur. So for Tier 1, you have the Mirkwood Hunters, very low accuracy, 140 meter range, only 2 missile attack, but they have 203 goblins, and only 1 total defense. They are abysmal in melee, but they are very cheap, and with sheer numbers and volume of fire, they can be effective, especially when it comes to fighting lightly armored elven archers. Like, I'd rather have these guys draw arrow fire, and you'll see them do okay damage, but that low amount of ammo and low accuracy, excuse me, does kind of hurt their usefulness. But again, 125 upkeep, just like the Mirkwood goblins, they have their usage, and that is just simply spamming them and filling up your armies. Oftentimes my tactics with these types of archers are just to throw them in the front line more or less, sometimes in a loose formation or not, or I'll just have a bunch of them next to each other, and I'll send them far forward because I know that they can do some damage and I don't need to care about them so much, and I can just get them to shoot their arrows long before the battle even gets close to ending, and they can do okay damage. So Merc 100's there, just complete trash, even though I say so many enlightening things about them. Next off, you have the Guldur archers in your tier 1 range, a 3-3-2 with 5 defense, low accuracy, so better than the goblins. They also have poison arrows, so this is the specialty of your factions. Poison arrows are very powerful in that they pretty much reduce the stage of a unit's morale down to shaken, or if they're shaken, it'll bring them down to wavering. I don't remember the actual number for it, but you can shoot at any unit and you'll see that instantly they'll go from like good morale to yellow morale. And so that's one thing. You have a lot of fear causing units, so you can stack these with your other units that cause fear, like the Castellans, and cause a lot of early routing. Even if the enemy general is still alive, you have that advantage. Outside of the poison arrows, nothing too fancy to talk about with these guys. They'll take enemy archer fire relatively okay, though poor defense isn't really saying much. Next to them, we have the Guldur Scouts, pretty much just the same as the Guldur Host, but give them a Javelin and then they lose 2 defense. They are a bit more lightly armored, so they go from 4 to 2. 5 missile attack, not armor piercing, low accuracy, but their Javelins are effective against horses, camels, and elephants, or anything like that. But they cannot take a charge themselves. So an interesting unit. They can do very respectable burst damage from close range with their Javelins, but don't expect too much out of them. I would admittedly rather have more scouts than I would want to have Guldur Host, just because these guys will actually get a decent number of kills with their first volley, and if they can get all 3 volleys off, the better. So a good unit to have, and something that is nice for the orcs, since they don't often get Javelin units. Going into the tier 3 archery range, this is where we get a bit more fancy. Starting off with the Goblin Hunters, probably the only unit you could say is like more or less a Goblin Ranger type unit, though that's not saying a lot in terms of Rangers. They're a 5-5-3 with 10 total defense, the ability to hide anywhere, lower numbers than the other archers at 165, but again they have poisoned arrows, a decent missile attack for an orc unit with 28 missiles and average accuracy, though they do have longer range at 170 meters. Just another good unit to have. You are a very archer-focused and ambush-style / poison, fear-causing faction, more or less, if I was to sum it up in like 30 words there. So Goblin Hunters, fancy unit. Next to them, you do get the Goblin Stalkers, a 190-man strong unit. These are Javelins with effective against armor, the ability to hide anywhere with their kind of Mirkwood camo, decent armor, and decent melee attack. So this is a very, very good unit. You're going to want to get Goblin Stalkers. The armor piercing is nice, the ability to hide anywhere is nice, and they have okay melee stats, so they'll hold their own in melees. If you can get Goblin Stalkers, definitely you do want to get Goblin Stalkers. So I feel like I say less about these guys than I do about the very crappy trash Mirkwood Goblin units. Like, I talk about my strategies with them, and then I get to these guys, and I'm like, you just throw them around, you hide them, and you throw your Javelins, and I mean, to be fair, that's really it. I wouldn't want to try to throw these guys away. I'd like to keep them safe and allow them to use all of their ammo on priority targets, such as enemy generals, enemy cavalry, enemy heavy infantry, anything like that. The Goblin Stalkers fill a very nice role, and that is ambushing and, having good javelins. So the final unit requiring the Shadow's Calling and only available in Mirkwood, and that is basically because of the ability that they have stakes. The Kamul's Shadow Rangers, so a 7/6/12 unit, so very similar to the stats of the Goblin Headhunters, just a bit of an upgrade. They also have the poison arrows, but here they have good morale and very high accuracy, long range, and 32 missiles. So In terms of an archer, this is the best you've got. And in terms of Evil Nations, one of the very few ranger-style units that you will ever see. Outside of them, I can only really think of like the Hashari Rangers of... They're not even called Rangers, are they? Just Hashari Shadows of Harad. Baruthiel's Watch comes to mind, though they're not so much of a ranger unit. And then the Dark Blades of Angmar. So not a whole lot of ranger units to be seen. Maybe you could make a case for Loknar Rim, but I'd say they're more of a standard like frontline archer unit than a ranger. So very good unit. The stakes, that is a very powerful ability, of course, to protect your archers from cavalry, because you do have somewhat of a cavalry weakness with this faction. Just keep them out of range, keep them at that 215 meters while you can, as long as they're enemy archers. And they are very good at pretty much firing and then running away from an enemy and firing again. They have very good skirmish capabilities. So that's all I can really say about the Shadow Rangers. Use them as you would any other Rangers, but of course try to stack that poison effect with rear charges on a unit and any terror that you can find from your units that frighten the enemy. So very good unit. So now we'll go into the cavalry. 3 options here. First off, the Warg Marauders, and a decent Warg unit they are at 75 models, 8, 5, and 11, with 5 armor and 6 defense skill. Do note these Wargs do not have any shields at all, so they do have a significant weakness to archers. Wargs in general have a weakness to archers, and that is because look at the size of these guys. They have a huge model, like pretty much bigger than horses, more or less. I guess maybe it's around the same, actually. It always looked bigger to me than a horse, but maybe I'm not actually thinking about that correctly. I've always felt like wargs have a huge hitbox, though. So, excellent warg unit. Use it to run into enemy, rear charge. Send them against cavalry. They're too good because they do have a bonus against horses. And if you can get them safely into archers, they will do a huge amount of damage on the charge. But they are weak to being shot themselves. And any enemy horse archers will counter Warg Marauders. So Anduin's horse archers are a big counter to Warg Marauders. So just watch out for those, and you'll do okay. Same with the Anduin Aeltheo cavalry, the ones with the throwing javelins. They'll be able to outrun the Warg Marauders and kill pretty much your entire unit with their throwing javelins, should they be allowed to focus on your Marauders. So though they are good against horses, they are not good against skirmish cavalry. Next to them, we have the mounted goblins, the goblin striders. So pretty much take the goblin stalkers and throw them on a warg at less than half the model count. 7 melee, so they're actually a little worse on the offensive side of melee, though they do come with a better charge than the Warg Marauders, and that is because they have a spear, so that get a bit of a charge bonus. 13 total defense makes them a bit more resilient, and they also have effective against armor with 6 missiles at average accuracy. So an excellent mobile javelin unit. Good against enemy cavalry. They can actually fight back and take the arrows decently well with their shield. So an excellent unit. You'll definitely want to get one of these. And finally, we have the Shadow Knights, pretty much the star of the roster in the very much Easterling designed armor here. The Shadow Knights, they really should have like armored horses. It's kind of a shame that they don't. It's just a regular horse. You'd think the horses would be weak to something like that, like an arrow hitting them. Anyways, they have 10 attack, 11 charge because of their long spears that they have and that they are heavy cavalry, 29 total defense, and then a 9 secondary attack. So they don't lose much on the offensive capabilities once they do charge in. Excellent morale. It is very, very hard to break these guys. And being that your faction leader has them as a bodyguard, they're absolutely ridiculous. You're going to see a lot of kills from Kummel the Easterling, so use him, and don't even be afraid to lose him, because you'll just get him back later. The Shadow Knights are a very, very powerful cavalry unit, and anytime you can recruit more of them, you definitely will, especially against all the elves you're going to be fighting, like with their archers and stuff. You're going to want Shadow Knights to be able to just run them down en masse. So you do get some very, very solid cavalry options and very good ranged options. Not so much in the melee department, just kind of standard bug, like orcish and human infantry. Now finally, we'll go on to the specials here. I'm going to start with the spiders in front because they're the most curious unit of the bunch. These are the Mirkwood spiders, a relic from classic 3rd Age 3. 6 attack doesn't sound like much, but they do have area of effect on their attack, so when they charge in, They'll hit multiple models at once. Even after the charge, they'll continue to attack multiple models at once. It's kind of like they're an elephant in that regard. And they have a very, very fast attack speed. So they'll attack, they'll do a little pounce, and then pretty much a second later, they'll do another attack. So they have a very high attack rate, but they are somewhat squishy. It does say they have 23 defense, but they only have 2 hit points, and low model count, only 25 spiders. So over time, they will, against other elite enemy infantry or spears, they will take losses. If you are fighting these guys, you're going to want to shoot them with everything you've got. Javelins will also completely wreck the spiders, in which case your infantry can mop them up. But they're a fun unit to have and just to throw around the battlefield. They make for great assassins, so something like a bodyguard, they'll be able to go in and just destroy pretty much anything. Swan Knights, these guys do amazing for. I mean, they are like overpowered in some ways and like also really glass cannony in others, even though the stats seem misleading. You'd think they'd be really tanky, but they have their uses. They have their uses. So just don't throw them away, and you'll see excellent use. I'd rather use these guys as a hammer to hammer and anvil tactics rather than just letting them do frontal charges. They might take too many casualties with their low model count. And they also have a very wide formation, so unless they're up against compacted infantry, their charges won't do a whole lot of damage just because of how spread out the unit is. So going on next to them, we do have the Trolls being the first nation we are covering in version 5 that has Trolls. Pretty much they function like just heavy infantry, super heavy infantry. 38 attack, not armor piercing, but you don't need it at 38 attack. 30 total defense, only 10 armor though, so they have a weakness to archers. And being that you'll have to fight elves a lot and the Anduin, if the AI is smart, they will focus down your Trolls. Their only real weakness is that, and very powerful infantry can swarm them. So wherever you send the Trolls, they work effectively as line breakers, but you want them to be supported. So this is where having a unit of like Mirkwood Uruks to fight alongside them, even just Mirkwood Goblins to meat shield, this can be a very effective strategy because the Mirkwood Goblins will take the damage for the Trolls while the Trolls dish it out. So I'd recommend layering your units if you can. Try not to let the Trolls just fight alone. Otherwise, what will happen is, imagine they're fighting these Mirkwood Goblins. The Goblins, you'll get like 5 or 6 of them around one Troll model. Anything behind that Troll, he gets pretty much no defensive skill to, and it's only his armor keeping alive. So they do have that weakness. If they overextend into enemy infantry, they will take losses. So you want to keep them inundated with your own forces. But that powerful charge is very nice. They do excellent against charging enemy cavalry. Just try not to charge like heavy lancers head on and you'll do just fine with them. They also frighten the enemy infantry. So if you stack these guys with some poison arrows, you're going to rout most enemy units without a problem. And finally, since we have them, the Troll Catapult. So pretty much like a normal catapult, but manned by Trolls, 300 meter range. They have longer range than typical catapults, and they can hold their own in melee okay. Though do note, these Trolls are significantly weaker than, say, the Trolls that are over here that have these giant clubs. They will not fight as well against enemies as regular Trolls do. So they can be somewhat weak. You might think, oh, I have a Troll unit here, but their melee stats, though it's not really shown here, they won't get much work done. Don't use Troll Catapult crews as you would normal Trolls unless you're really desperate. They just don't have the resilience as regular Trolls do. They actually have 1 less hit point at 4 instead of 5, and a little like 1 less armor point. But they also have significantly less attack. It doesn't say, I'd have to check the files, but they are, from everything I've always noticed with Troll Catapult crews, they're quite squishy. And also quite vulnerable to being charged, so don't let a enemy cavalry unit get behind and do a rear charge. They'll probably kill the entire Troll unit. Just something to be aware of there. But that's pretty much it for Dol Guldur as a roster. So, you know, for specialties, you do have plenty of archer options. You do have plenty of, you know, ambushing units. Your melee infantry is somewhat smaller compared to other rosters. I mean, we only have, outside of the bodyguard, that is 6 dedicated melee units. So you're a bit light in that regard, and you don't have a whole lot of variety either. So that can be somewhat concerning playing as Dol Guldur. but you do get plenty of archers, so it kind of balances it out. Most orc nations would spam infantry. You get to spam plenty of missiles. I mean, we're going to watch the Avari Naharim here just get absolutely peppered, or I guess the AI is going to choose to hit more 20 sentinels for whatever reason. Okay, AI, you do that. You do that. Anyway, if you haven't seen already, the next faction for next week's video I'm really excited to cover is Dorwinion. So I can't wait till we get to that one. There's a lot more going on with Dorwinion than there is with Dol Guldur. And oh my goodness, look at these Dorwinion sword bastards just getting absolutely destroyed here by the spiders. Look at how quickly the spiders just like get in here. This is what I'm talking about. The spider will just jump in, attack, hit a bunch of units, kill a bunch of units, and then he just keeps moving forward. So they can be a glass cannon in the right circumstance, but as of right now, see, now we're starting to take some casualties. A spider over here died. They're not good at taking damage. But on the charge, they do a lot. Here come the Vintner Court Knights. Let's charge those if we can. And even these Vintner Court Knights, I mean, look at this. The spider is occupying like 4 or 5 knights here, hitting them all with every hit. As long as he's not getting hit back, they'll do okay. But once the spiders kind of push into a unit, then they'll start getting attacked from behind. But anything in front of them, they don't care about. So, as you can see, they might be a little overpowered, but look at how quickly they're dying. Granted, they are fighting very powerful infantry. So take of that as you will. Some people might think that the spiders are very overpowered. But I did basically just kill 2 whole units with them, and I didn't even use them effectively. So maybe they are overpowered, but you also only get them in Dol Guldur. So you don't have many options for them for recruitment. So other than that, it looks like a fun battle over here. Look at the the Goblin Striders have engaged with the Vintner Court Paladins, units that we'll go in depth with on the following video. Here come the Morquendi Protectors. This is what I will say is a effective use of the trolls here, as the catapult crews do a lot of friendly fire there. That's unfortunate. We'll send the trolls in alongside these Uruk Slayers. Now, these Morquendi Pikes, quite powerful. They'll absolutely destroy these Goblin Headhunters. Wow, that was too dangerous. Trolls, can we actually charge? Hello? I'd like to see an actual charge. There we go. So they're going to run into these pikes, which is then going to allow the rest of the infantry to move up and inundate onto the enemy pikes here. So that is the biggest utility of trolls, is using them to just knock up pikemen, destroy lines, and then you can swarm with your other infantry. And look at how quickly they're absolutely... These Morquendi Protectors actually got demolished here, which is quite surprising. Anyway, that's just a bit of utility with trolls, and just them being able to run in, charge, disrupt a unit. You might see a halberd wall, and then suddenly the entire line is just sent flying. I absolutely love the trolls. I find them so good, and especially if you can do stuff like this where you just continuously charge the unit, you'll get very good use out of them. Look at that, just completely breaking up the pipeline here, disrupting them and not allowing them to really fight back, sending the Morquendi up into the air, while now the supporting Uruks can help to clean up shop. So that's pretty much it for Dol Guldur. I had a lot of fun with this battle here at the end, and I hope you guys are, as I say, enjoying version 5, and I will see you all again on the next video. Until then, my friends, farewell.